So as I'm getting prepared to do my next video, which will be to show you the shaper on a Mark V with and without a speed increaser, started to prep the fence. And this is something that attaches to the main table and works very much like a shaper fence on any shaper or on a router table. As I got ready to use this, I realized, man, this thing's messed up. It needs some maintenance. And I got halfway through that maintenance when I realized this is something you need to know. So we're going to cover the maintenance of this real quick, and then the next video we'll actually use this. Now I want to show you, going back to the very earliest version of the multi-purpose tools from Shopsmith, or branded Shopsmith, was the Magna, that's the main parent company at the time, Magna Engineering's 10ER that came to market back in the 1940s. And they came up with a fence that could mount directly onto the main table and could be used for jointing or could be used for shaping. Now, it allowed you, with the turn of a knob, to move one of the fences that's on it. As they move forward with the Mark V, they came out, this is the 1950s now, they came out with another style of fence that would clamp on the two extreme edges of the main table. And this is a Taiwanese copy, but it's actually a very simplified copy. But what you do have here is an indexable sort of in-feed fence that you can dial in and out, and an out-feed fence that's pretty crude. Now, this one, again, clamps onto the table. When Shopsmith came out with the Mark VII, they made the main table a little bit larger than on the Model 500, and they realized that this casting is getting pretty big. Maybe we could do that a little different. So what they did, so this has a couple bolts that clamp directly through holes in the main table of the 1960s model Mark VII. Now, that's designated differently than today's Mark VII by seeing the VII for the 7, the numeral 7, where today the Mark VII manufactured by Shopsmith is a Mark VII with the number 7. Anyway, this bolted through the main table, and that's how this attached. When the Mark VII was put out the pasture and the Mark V Model 500 came back, Shopsmith Incorporated in the early 70s brought back that original Mark V version fence until the 510 was introduced. So this is the fence of today's Mark VII. This was introduced around 1985 when the Mark V Model 510 was introduced. The 510 has a much bigger table system, tubular rails, floating tables, and wonderful, wonderful saw guards. And then that continued on with this main table being adapted for use with this extruded fence that was the Mark V Model 520 and is still the same thing used today with the Mark VII. Instead of making a casting that would have been the largest one yet, they continued with the idea of the Mark VII from the 1960s that has a fence that bolts through a couple holes in the table. You may have wondered what those holes were for. Well, they're for the shaper fence and only for the shaper fence. Now, interestingly, this is the one product that Shopsmith makes that I don't mind the use of square nuts. I know that's not what I normally say. I hate square nuts. But you can see here that this bolt has a nut that's captured by the casting. The bolt that passes through and holds the fence, wooden fence faces, is held in place with a square nut. And then the large bolts that we bolt this entire base through the main table is held in place with square nuts. And underneath the table, directly on the opposite side of these holes, are a couple little ears that act as a wrench that holds those square nuts in place. So I'm going to take this off and bolt it down, and then we're going to do a little bit of maintenance on this because something about the way these are made seems to attract a bit of corrosion and makes them tough to move. So let me get this bolted down. Little side note, anybody who knows me has heard me say that washers, when they're stamped out of the steel, end up with a little burr, a little sharp edge on them. And I want that burr to be facing up, surprisingly, up towards where my hand, my wrench are going to be, so that the smooth face is facing down. It makes a better contact, and especially when we're talking about a painted surface here, we're not going to be gouging circular cuts into the paint. So I always check that. And of course, these are upside down. At this point, before I put this together, I'm going to clean off these threads because they are a bit rusty. And we're going to throw a little bit of lube on them as well to keep them from rusting. A little before and after for you. Now you can see the two holes in the table that should align with these slots. And we'll simply drop the bolt down through the slots. And we'll put these, oh my goodness, look at the rust on the nuts. Gotta polish my nuts. All right, so now the nuts are going to go underneath here, under the table. And as you get that bolt almost fully tightened, you will notice that the casting will hold on to that just as if it's inside of an open end wrench. All right, so now we have the first of our adjustments on this. We can slide this in and out and get this aligned where we want it. Now we'll cover this in greater detail as we get into actual use of the shaper. But what I want to do now is I want to make these move as smoothly as possible. Because if I need to make an adjustment with the fence, I don't want to be fighting it. So the way that we move these fence faces is we loosen this machine screw and turn this knob. Now you'll see there's a little detent there, and underneath it, there's a spring pushing up. And as I rotate this around, I can get very small increments of adjustment, and this should move relatively easily. Now, this one I've already cleaned up. This one over here is really, really rough. And so what we're going to find here, just as we did on this side, is there's going to be corrosion between these parts. And you will see, once we get this completely unthreaded, this knob has a male bolt on it that passes through a female threaded hole on this casting. Interestingly, that 1960s Mark VII fence, this part right here is cast iron. I was surprised to see that. These have been aluminum for as long as I've known them. That is one heck of a thread. Come on, buddy. There we go. So there you can see the thread and the male bolt, and that's rusty. And there's corrosion inside of this little saddle here. And you can see that that's kind of chalky too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go at this with a couple different grits of Scotch-Brite and clean that up as best I can. I'll be doing the same thing here. And down inside of this groove, you can see there is a little leaf spring that's pushing up and applying just a little bit of attention right here on the detent. Got some work to do. All right, mostly what we're after is to get rid of that corrosion and get this as smooth as it can be. All right, and then we're going to do the same for down inside of this hole. And we'll start that process here on the male threads. Great time as well to clean up the exterior of these knobs because they're likely corroded, and get down inside of that groove. And as a final step, all of these parts, everything here can be paste waxed in order to maintain a little bit of protection and to keep the parts moving smoothly. This casting right here is sometimes you'll find there's some pits and voids, and you might also find that this is too tight even when everything is loose. This is also true of the lower saw guard of the 510 sometimes, and you might have to loosen it, and with this post out of it, take a wedge, ideally one made of wood, and drive that wedge in just ever so slightly to spread these two parts of the casting. We don't want to break it. We just want to add a little bit of distance between them. It doesn't take much, and you'll find that these will be nice and loosened up. Okay, now with everything clean, we'll set this knob with its groove down on top of this ridge, like so. Make sure we face the fence the correct direction. Now here you can see how those square nuts are captured, but if we were to loosen the bolts on the face of the fence, we can adjust the fence open or close to accommodate our taper cutter or router bit. And now we have the tedious task of winding this back in. All right, at this point, we could use a straight edge to get these two faces perfectly parallel to one another, and we would then be ready to shape. So in the next video, we'll actually put this to use. And in the meantime, I look forward to any questions, comments, or cheap shots that you may have.